both Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren both attacked the protection of billionaires. First, here is Bernie Sanders on taxing billionaires. Let's play this one.
And you introduced your wealth tax, which would tax the assets of the wealthiest Americans. You said, quoting you, Senator, billionaires should not exist. Is the goal of your plan to tax billionaires out of existence?
When you have 500,000 Americans sleeping out on the street today, when you have 87 million people uninsured or underinsured, when you got hundreds of thousands of kids who cannot afford to go to college and millions struggling with the oppressive burden of student debt, and then you also have 3 people owning more wealth than the bottom half of American society, that is a moral and economic outrage. And the truth is, we cannot afford to continue this level of income and wealth inequality, and we cannot afford a billionaire class whose greed and corruption has been at war with the working families of this country for 45 years. So if you're asking me, do I think we should demand that the wealthy start paying, the wealthiest, top 0.1%, start paying their fair share of taxes so we can create a nation and a government that works for all of us? Yes, that's exactly what I believe.
Now, technically, the question was actually, do you think we should tax billionaires out of existence? And the short answer to that is yes. I can see to a certain extent. I mean, I think the fact that he doesn't feel comfortable just saying that, yes, I think is probably a function of a diseased society that we have on some level where, like there would be some type of offense. Like, well, wait a second, you can't, that's so wrong. It's an affront on freedom to tax a billionaire out of existence to where they would just be 100 millionaire. First of all, it's just a bizarre, threshold to say, is where freedom lies, right? I mean, the idea that we would have confiscatory taxes is for some reason, well, first of all taxes are confiscatory on some level. But one that is aimed just to be confiscatory is also about maintaining some remote and very remote semblance of political equality and the ability to allow the directions our society move in to be at least remotely determined by all the people who live in society. I mean, we have seen the damage that can be done by billionaires based upon even their best of intentions. Even if I don't believe that Bill Gates didn't see an emerging market in schools, and therefore, I mean, and I don't know whether to believe that or not, but let's just assume that every single dollar that Bill Gates spent on reforming education, quotation marks, was spent with the purest of intentions. And he was able to divorce the way that he's not able to do that. For the purest of intentions. They spent $750 million, $250 million, on enhancing school education. By doing that, they convinced a lot of other money to follow suit. They convinced an entire country to pursue these notions of high stakes testing, of a way of measuring value added to teachers. And at the end of this experiment, after literally school district after school district pursued grants and whatnot, after the entire country, in many respects, changed their perspective of how to assess education and what to do with it, they did a study. The Rand Corporation, is that what it is? Rand? Is that the one of the? They did it at the end of 2018, maybe it was, or the end of 2017. I can't remember. And they found that their experiment was an absolute failure. And in fact, that the RAND said we should listen to educators more, and we should basically do what they've been saying this whole entire time. It was a big oopsie. It was barely reported in the press, if at all. I mean, I remember when we were talking about it, and I was certainly looking around. Is anybody going to even acknowledge the fact that a billionaire was able to take our entire education system and drive it into an iceberg and then just walk away going like, boop, my bad.
I tried.
Gonna give me points for that. On to the next thing. If you have one person or 3 families or 5 families who have the ability to change the direction of policy in this way, it is not only incredibly undemocratic, but more often than not will be a complete disaster because it will not bring in a sufficient number of people who are involved in that area. And you get disasters like this. I mean,
May I do a slight tangent on Bill Gates? New York Times piece, very conservatively reported. Bill Gates went to great efforts to minimize his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Just putting it out there.
Well, okay, but that is
a tangent. I said that.
Right.
Told you.
But
I think it's worth noting.
But the bottom line is that, and then of course, from a political standpoint, I mean, it's not, there's no difference there. Political, I mean, that is a political standpoint. That is just a broad swath of society that was just driven into an
people's
iceberg.
Feedback loops get interrupted.
In addition to all of that stuff being true, as I've said time and again, billionaires aren't billionaires because they worked a billion times harder than everyone else. They're billionaires because they got other people to work for them and they exploited them, and other people's work made that money, and it's not asking too much to get some of it back.
I totally agree. And that is like a fairness question on some level. But even if we had an example of a billionaire who somehow, well, they can't, right? I mean, I'm basically saying, like, if we had the ability for someone to fly, if I had wings, I would be able to fly. But it's not just a question of fairness in whether they deserve the money or not. Because of course, it's not possible for someone to deserve that money. You get it because you're lucky. I don't even feel like I deserve the money that I make doing this. Nobody deserves anything. Nobody who's in Syria right now deserves to have lost their home. Nobody deserves to have their parents or their children killed.
I mean, workers do deserve the fruits of their labor.
Well, I think to a certain extent, of course, but I mean, there's no question of deserving. There's a question of fairness, but this notion of deserving. The bottom line is society. It is dysfunctional for society. It is anti-democratic, and it is dysfunctional to allow people to have this much wealth, which inevitably allows them to have an outsized amount of political power. And
I think the different messages will resonate differently with different people. Some
I
people might
agree.
respond better to, this is what's going to be better for society. And some people might respond better to, these assholes stole something from you and we're going to get it back.
Right. And it's, look, and we're sitting on a time now where there's a report where for the first time ever, workers are paying a higher tax rate than investors and owners. Play this graph. The first time ever. And understand, and this was a function, Emmanuel Saez and Gabriel Zuckman of University of California, Berkeley, their new book, Triumph of Injustice, present data that's showing in 2018, labor income was taxed at a higher rate than capital income for the first time in modern U.S. history. The proximate cause of the shift was the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which dramatically slashed taxes on corporate profits and on estates, both forms of capital income. This is according to their analysis. They note, however, that the trend has been happening for decades. driven in large part by the same forces that have pushed billionaires' tax rates below that of the working class. From the 40s to the 80s, the average tax rate on capital exceeded 40%, while labor paid less than 25%. Since its peak in the 50s, however, the average capital tax rate has been cut by 20 percentage points. At the same time, labor taxation has risen by more than 10 points, driven by the upsurge in payroll taxes. I mean, this is just absurd. And understand, what this also represents is not only a tremendous amount of, obviously of unfairness and instability. We're giving capital so much free stuff, right? Like all the services that they use, all of the features of society that have worked so well for them in allowing them to accrue that much wealth, they are getting at a discounted rate, and we are paying for it. Like they say, there's no free lunch. They're getting a free lunch, and we're paying for it. And look, that's the way society works.
Well, it's a snowball effect, right? The more money they have, the more power they have. The more power they have to amass even more money. Indeed.
But they also have been set up. We have since 1980, you can see it right there. I mean, the graph is right there, even in maybe 1970, mid-70s. You can see that the context is set up there. And of course, I can accrue more money. You give me free stuff, I will accrue more money. If you guys all here are free, and somebody's going to send me, half a dozen of audio editors and video editors and send it to me for free, more free services, this office becomes free. Guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to amass more wealth, and I'm going to do it more quickly, and I'm going to do it more efficiently, and I'm going to be able to increase the rate in which I acquire more wealth because I'm getting free stuff.
That's what capitalism is.